6 p.m. on a Thursday here in Korea. Welcome to our newscast. I'm Daniel Che. We begin with the headlines. North Korea may be planning to launch a long-range missile. According to recent satellite imagery, the South's defense ministry closely monitors the situation in the recently completed launch site in Dongchangri. President Park Geun-hye makes an appearance at the Youth Hope Foundation to show her support for young job seekers. The organization has collected some $110 million. All the amount will be used to provide customized services for up to 125,000 young people. Samsung Electronics' net profit for 2015 October to December period went down almost 40% from 2014. Darker days ahead with slump in demand for IT products, including chips and smartphones. Job creation. It's a key priority for the nation's top office again this year. President Park Geun-hye showed her support for young job seekers today during a visit to the Youth Foundation site she helped to create. Jung Ji-sun starts us off.
During a visit to Youth Hope Foundation she helped launch, President Park Geun-hye encouraged young job seekers not to give up hope of finding employment. The organization was launched with a donation from the president after a tripartite agreement in September. It now has a budget of $110 million, thanks to additional donations from other patrons. This year, the fund is seeking to provide customized services for up to 125,000 young people, from mentoring to consultations on overseas internships at trading companies. One of its key functions is matching young people with opportunities at prospective startups and small and mid-sized companies. It also holds weekly job fairs featuring one company per week to guarantee that all applicants go through an interview. Upon hearing stories from a dozen people who have landed jobs through the foundation, the president said youth job creation will still be a key focus of her administration this year. With the package of related bills still pending at the National Assembly, President Park repeated her call for labor reforms and vowed to create more jobs through new growth engines. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Assembly Speaker Chung Eui-hwa's proposal to amend the controversial law on parliamentary operations is falling short to win a consensus from the country's main rival parties. Kim Young-gil brings us to contrasting responses.
The ruling Saenuri Party on Thursday urged its opposition party counterparts to pass the parliamentary speaker's plan to revise the National Assembly law.
If we don't reach a compromise on the current law, then the 20th National Assembly will come to a standstill, as we're experiencing now. Therefore, we must revise the law so the Speaker has greater discretion to introduce bills.
National Assembly Speaker Chung Eui-hwa's proposal would restore majority rule to the parliament. Aside from that, the ruling party also wants to expand the Speaker's authority to introduce bills. The main opposition Minju Party says the proposal is undemocratic, as it eliminates a provision for bipartisan consent in the current version of the law.
Empowering the Speaker to introduce bills related to the economy or public security if a majority of lawmakers consent, and limiting the amount of time for deliberations over a bill, goes against the purpose of this law. We cannot accept it.
Under the current law, deadlocked bills can be put up for a vote only when 60% of lawmakers are in agreement. Chung's proposal would drop the 60% requirement and allow a bill to come to the floor when a majority of lawmakers make the demand. The proposal also shortens the amount of time lawmakers have to consider a bill. The current deliberation time is at least 330 days. Chung suggested it be reduced to a maximum of 75 days. Chung agrees there should be limits on the Speaker's power. He's also hoping his proposal will be accepted to bring an end to the current legislative paralysis. Lawmakers plan to discuss it at a parliamentary steering committee meeting on Friday. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
Is North Korea preparing for another provocation following its nuclear test early this month? It's possible, according to recent news report by a Japanese outlet. Connie Kim fills us in on the movements at a major launch site that suggests a long-range missile could be fired at any given time.
South Korea's defense ministry noted the possibility of North Korea launching a long-range ballistic missile in an abrupt manner, and is closely monitoring the situation. The ministry's comments come following a report by Japan's Kyodo News Agency on Wednesday, stating that recent satellite imagery indicated that North Korea could launch a long-range missile from its main launch site in Dongchangni on its northwest in about a week. South Korea has made clear that any long-range missile launched by North Korea is a violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions.
North Korea's long-range missile launch would be a provocation threatening peace and security on the Korean Peninsula, Northeast Asia, and the rest of the world. Seoul stands clear on its stance that Pyongyang must not carry out such a provocative act.
Government and intelligence sources said the launch site has been completed last year, and a long-range missile test can be conducted at any time. The height of the missile launcher has been extended to 67 meters from its previous 50 meters, meaning that it's capable of firing long-range missiles twice the size of the Unha-3, which was used to put a satellite into orbit in December 2012. In theory, the regime can fire a long-range missile with a range of 13,000 kilometers, meaning it could reach the east coast of the United States. What makes the situation even more concerning is that the launch pad has been covered, making it hard for U.S. spy satellites from tracking any missile launch preparations. Moreover, operations at the site are mostly automated, and rails to the launch site have been set up to quickly transport rocket components. North Korea had fired long-range ballistic missiles before, but what's different this time is that no missile was launched prior to the regime's fourth nuclear test early this month. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
It looks like Pyongyang will face even stronger sanctions from the international community, which is still mulling over how to punish the communist state for its recent nuclear test. Our Kwon So-hwa has more on the price the regime might pay should they go ahead with the missile test.
North Korea's ballistic missile tests violate UN resolutions, just as its recent nuclear test did. So if it really is about to test fire a missile, as recent reports suggest, the regime could be facing even heavier consequences.
There is a chance the international community could seek ways to ratchet up the sanctions against North Korea to a much higher level than they would for just a nuclear test. China could also strengthen its position.
That remains to be seen, though, especially as the U.S. and China, both permanent members of the UN Security Council, have so far failed to narrow the gap on the degree of sanctions that will be imposed, even after talks between U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on Wednesday. On top of that, 5 of the countries involved in the long-stalled 6-party denuclearization talks have also failed to find consensus on a proposal made by President Park Geun-hye last week to resume the multilateral form without North Korea. The U.S. has expressed support for it, and China and Russia have dismissed the idea.
From the start, we knew that China and Russia have had a passive point of view when it comes to this issue. But due to the severeness the fourth nuclear test brings, now is the time when the 5-party talks need to be reviewed. As Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se had mentioned, it's the path towards reviving 6-party negotiations.
Amid the multilateral efforts to curb North Korea's nuclear ambitions, the UN Security Council's 15 members are working on a new North Korea resolution for the recent nuclear test. While the general consensus on denuclearizing North Korea is there, with China and Russia on a different page than their 6-party counterparts, experts say it could be a while until new and stronger sanctions are adopted. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
Chinese President Xi Jinping expressed mild dissatisfaction with the recent visit by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who pressed Beijing to play a bigger role in North Korea. Shin Se-min brings us the latest.
According to a statement posted on the Chinese Foreign Ministry website, President Xi Jinping told U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on Wednesday that cooperation between the two world powers could be a win for both sides that contributes to peace, prosperity, and stability in the world. In other words, China wants balanced relations with the U.S. on pressing issues like regional security and the North Korea nuclear issue. China also wants Washington to consider its position on these matters. The remarks come after Kerry met with Chinese officials on Wednesday to discuss the U.S.-led UN Security Council resolution that's being drafted against North Korea. The two superpowers are at odds over whether harsher sanctions should be imposed on Pyongyang. China, a veto-wielding permanent member of the UN Security Council, does not want to sanction its longtime ally so heavily. Experts say a proposal by Washington to cut crude oil exports to the north will only cause chaos on the Korean peninsula and in China. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Asian shares closed mixed today despite a plunge in U.S. stock markets overnight. The drop on Wall Street came after the Federal Reserve gave no clear indication of when it might start lifting rates again. Our Hwang Ji-hye has the details.
Shares in Asia opened to a rough start but closed in mixed territory on Thursday. Japan's Nikkei dropped 0.7%, while Korea's benchmark Kospi shrugged off earlier losses and ended 0.5% up. In China, the Shanghai Composite fell almost 3%. The choppy trading in the region follows a sharp dive on Wall Street, where investors were hoping for a stronger sign from the Fed that could dismiss chances of a rate rise in March. The S&P 500 closed down over 1%, while the Nasdaq dropped more than 2%.
And I think from an equity market perspective, where companies have been facing difficult pricing power, difficult global economic conditions, difficult domestic economic conditions, having a Federal Reserve that's not your cheerleader is just not well received, and that's why we're having the response we're having from the markets.
The U.S. Federal Reserve opted to hold its key rate steady on Wednesday, saying it was closely monitoring global financial developments and how they might affect the U.S. labor market and inflation. Plunging oil prices coupled with the slowdown in China resulted in a massive sell-off in global stock markets early this year. While this turmoil had fueled speculation that the Fed may back away from its plan to tighten its monetary policy this year, the central bank gave little indication of when it will raise rates again. Last month, the Fed increased rates for the first time in almost a decade and suggested 4 more rate hikes this year. With the latest Fed statement, volatility remains in the markets, although analysts widely believe a second rate hike in the first quarter will be unlikely. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Korea is working fast to broaden its economic ties with Iran, but first, Seoul wants to ensure a long-standing payment system that's been used since sanctions were imposed remains in place. Lee Ji-won reports.
Officials from Korea's finance ministry, foreign ministry, and banks will meet with their Iranian counterparts during a 3-day trip that starts Saturday. According to financial institutions on Thursday, their talks will focus on maintaining the Korean currency payment system and expanding the payment system to include euros and other international currencies. The system is an alternate channel through which Korea and Iran have been able to do business since sanctions restricted all financial transactions with Iran in 2010. Under the system, Iran has accounts in Korean banks to facilitate trade in oil and other exports. Back then, when oil prices rose along with the increase in Korea's oil imports, the balance in the accounts grew massive, with the current amount estimated to be between $2.5 and $3.5 billion. Earlier reports indicated that Iran might be planning to withdraw its money, sparking concerns in government and financial circles, as a move like that would have a significant impact not only on Korean banks, but could also increase the uncertainty for Korean companies seeking to do business in Iran. But the Korean government dismissed such speculation, and some experts added that Iran is not likely to take such risky action just after being freed from international sanctions. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Slowing global demand for IT products caused Samsung Electronics' profits to slump in the fourth quarter. Analysts say 2016 is going to be even more challenging. Kim Min-ji explains why.
Korea's biggest tech firm saw its profit fall sharply in the fourth quarter of last year. Samsung Electronics says its net profit came to $2.7 billion in the October to December period, down almost 40% from a year ago. Operating profit for the fourth quarter rose 16% on year to over $5 billion, while sales edged up over 1% to $44 billion. The latest results reflect an industry-wide slump in the technology sector worldwide, stemming from weak global demand for electronic goods. A day earlier, Apple also said it expects sales in the current quarter to drop for the first time in over a decade. This is expected to dent Samsung's earnings even further as the company makes components for the U.S. company.
Profit in the chip sector fell more than expected despite seasonal demand, while sales in smartphones have been slowing. On top of that, there's been a supply glut and prices have fallen.
Samsung also continues to face fierce competition with Chinese rival companies, and there's been unfavorable exchange rates indicative of a tough road ahead for the tech giant.
Analysts expect the weak performance to continue throughout the first quarter of this year due to a slump in its mobile and chip business, though most are withholding judgment until after the release of the Galaxy S7. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A private fundraising campaign to help victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery has raised more than $84,000 in just 2 weeks. The Korean Council for Women drafted for military sexual slavery by Japan launched the campaign earlier this month in conjunction with 400 other civic organizations. More than 1,000 people have contributed to the campaign, which is ongoing. The council said the money will replace the $8.4 million that the Japanese government promised toward a foundation for the victims as part of the recent settlement struck by Korea and Japan. The council said the groups will also seek to nullify the settlement. And that's a wrap for us. Thank you for watching.